here we go on a Monday Wheelhouse. You're listening to ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. It is Monday, January 23rd, 2023. To get things rolling here, the start of another Wheelhouse radio program. Jake Asman, Cody Stoots, BK Brad Kellner, and producer Angel Carlson with you until 7 o'clock. A lot to talk about today. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Hopefully you spent it watching some of the awesome games that we had in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. We're going to cover each game in depth throughout the course of our show. We also got some Astros news to get into during Strohs at 4. A return of Strohs at 4. Got some news over the weekend from, dare I say, GM Jeff Bagwell. So we'll talk about some of his comments and much more then. But we start with the Texans and the latest with their head coaching search. They interviewed Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka yesterday. This followed them interviewing Demeco Ryans on Friday. So as of now, the Houston Texans have interviewed all 8 of the candidates they set out to speak to. Obviously, one of those candidates, Ben Johnson, already said he's going back to Detroit. So 7 names, Cody Stoots, and of course the most recent 2, Mike Kafka yesterday, Demeco Ryans on Friday.
Yeah, Mike Kafka with one of multiple interviews with the Texans yesterday, talked to a few teams yesterday. But the Demeco Ryans one is certainly an interesting one and a fascinating one. And based on the varied reported or not reported or rumored lengths of that interview, it certainly seems like the initial conversation between the Texans and Demeco Ryans over Zoom went well. And then Demeco Ryans got a big boost from a Texans fan base when J.J. Watt basically takes to Twitter and endorses Demeco Ryans to be the next head coach of the Houston Texans. I know that he didn't say he should be the next head coach of the Houston Texans.
But he did.
But he said he should be the next head coach of the Houston Texans. And then we find out over the weekend that despite having a couple more interviews scheduled, Demeco Ryans is not taking those interviews right now. Maybe they'll reschedule those, but he said no thanks to a couple of teams, got ready for a game, and then his defense had a very good performance yesterday against the Dallas Cowboys. And it feels like this fan base and the swell of support for Demeco Ryans continues to grow and continues to grow. And obviously it was an exciting proposition before the whole coaching search started. It's getting more and more exciting by the day, it feels like, for the Demeco Ryans group of people who support him to be the next head coach. And I do wonder if maybe the Texans didn't expect this groundswell to occur and grow as much as it did, and if that maybe helps them or hurts them in their decision-making process as well.
A lot of exciting happenings over the last 3 days if you're on the Demeco Ryans to the Texans bandwagon. You talked about the interview, obviously taking place on Friday. There were reports, as you mentioned, Cody, that the interview went very well and lasted a long time. Then you had the J.J. Watt endorsement tweet. Then you had the canceling/postponing of a couple of different interviews around the league. And also, Demeco Ryans is now the Vegas favorite to be the Texans head coach. And I saw earlier today, DraftKings Sportsbook removed the odds. They are no longer taking bets for who the Texans' next head coach is going to be.
Woo.
Generally, that happens when it's so obvious that the result is going to go a certain way that Vegas doesn't want to burn itself and lose a bunch of money, so they remove the odds so nobody else can win and make money off of them. So a lot of exciting happenings if you want Demeco Ryans to be the next head coach of the Texans. Nothing official yet, obviously, but it sure as hell feels like it is trending in that direction, gentlemen.
This was Jay Glazer on the Fox pregame show yesterday talking about Demeco Ryans.
49ers defensive coordinator Demeco Ryans, he's in demand for a head coaching job. And how about this? He actually had 4 job interviews lined up for yesterday, got through the first 2, which were the Broncos and the Texans, and said, I'm going to cancel the other 2 because I have to get back and really focus on the Dallas Cowboys. So he canceled on the Cardinals and then canceled on the Colts.
Now I think the next step in all this is, does he reschedule those interviews with the Cardinals and the Colts? Because right now you're just competing with the Denver Broncos for Demeco Ryans, and it seems like the Denver Broncos are the current favorites to land Sean Payton. So if Payton goes to Denver and Demeco doesn't reschedule any other interviews, then it's the Texans versus Demeco choosing to maybe stay in San Francisco for another year. So if you want Demeco Ryans, you certainly got a lot of momentum towards that being the ultimate goal or the ultimate thing, the ultimate solution to the Texans head coaching search.
Yeah, I do wonder if there's a movement amongst Texans fans to where it sort of turns into Demeco or bust at some point. It's not ever been that for me. Demeco's been my top choice in the coaching cycle and in this carousel as it got started. But I do wonder if, as Sean Payton kind of entertains some of these other interviews, he gets the second one with Denver. We hear about how it may not have gone super well from a Zoom standpoint, plus the draft pick compensation that it takes to get Sean Payton. And then just sort of the lack of buzz from some of these other guys that are in the running. Like, yeah, Shane Steichen's a really nice coach. There's just not a lot of buzz to him. Jonathan Gannon's a nice coach, not a lot of buzz. Even Kafka yesterday. I mean, the interview happens amongst 3 interviews that he has that day, and it just kind of – he didn't even get the 2 slides on Instagram. Everybody else got 2 slides.
Look at the replies to that tweet.
Yeah, the people going to use Saturday night against Kafka. That's not fair. That's not fun. He went up against a really good defense.
Yeah, he did.
They were only in that spot in the first place because of the coaching job he was a part of.
Exactly. So I do wonder if this fan base sort of turns into a Demeco or bust fan base. And if it gets to that, and the ownership is more heavily involved than previously, maybe it gets a little bit harder for Nick Caserio to hire his purported guy, Jonathan Gannon. It gets a little easier to make sure Demeco Ryans is the head coach of the Houston Texans.
I have been swept up by the tidal wave of Demeco Ryans support.
I saw it yesterday, BK.
Yeah, I'm officially all in on Demeco Ryans. Now, that tweet I sent out was alcohol-induced and anger-induced after the Cowboys came up short against the 49ers, but Demeco Ryans was a huge part.
What did you tweet out for those who don't follow at Brad Kellner on Twitter?
I basically said the Texans should fold their franchise if they don't offer Demeco Ryans the head coaching job. And I don't think they should fold their franchise. I just think Cal should have to sell the team. But I also think he should have to sell the team either way. So, really not a productive tweet on my part. But, look, I was already in on Demeco Ryans. But now he's at the top of my list. Their defense is just so good. And, of course, they've got talent. We understand that. The Niners' defense is loaded with talent, and the Texans' defense is not. But their players just play so smart and so disciplined. I mean, when's the last time you've been able to use those words to describe the Texans? Smart and disciplined. It's been years since we've been able to say that about this team. And they're also so physical. Guys, in the last 2 seasons, the Texans have been top 5 in the league in missed tackles. They were number 2 this season. You don't get that with Demeco Ryans. Like, there will be a night and day, 180-degree difference with this defense as soon as Demeco Ryans gets here. I mean, I know this defense turns it around immediately if he's the guy. And just the energy and enthusiasm and passion he brings to the table is just special. His players talk glowingly about him. And if you just watch, and obviously the stats back up the story as well, he's done such a tremendous job. He's proven he's been there for a couple of years. There are so many boxes that Demeco Ryans checks. And after really watching him closely yesterday, I've watched a ton of Niners football this year, but really being focused and in that environment against the Cowboys offense that was coming off its most complete performance of the season the week before, that looked damn near unstoppable against a top 10 Bucs defense. For the Niners to do what they did yesterday is a direct reflection on the type of coach that Demeco Ryans is. I'm officially all in on this dude after what we saw last night.
It does seem like it's Demeco Ryans versus Jonathan Gannon at this point in time. I was reading Albert Breer earlier today. He connected those two. We know Breer's broken plenty of stories over the years involving the Patriots organization. He's got a relationship with Nick Caserio, so that's the Houston Texan connection there to Albert Breer. It does feel like it's those two. And you can't sit here and say Jonathan Gannon's a bad candidate, especially after what his defense was able to do Saturday night. But let's be real, Demeco Ryans is the best candidate, and he's the candidate that will galvanize and excite this fan base, and that should play a part in this. I know ultimately it's about hiring the best coach, but the tiebreaker should be hire the candidate that makes the fan base the most excited, and that by far is Demeco Ryans.
Yeah, both these guys are badass coaches. Like, I think that's a really important aspect, that both these guys are really, really good coaches, that if you end up with one of the two, like, you should feel decent. It feels more exciting if you end up with Demeco Ryans compared to Jonathan Gannon. It just feels more exciting. And look, like, you should understand why it's more exciting. This guy is one of the most important figures in the history of this franchise. You read constantly about how teammates raved about him. They called him coach at Alabama. They called him cap with the Texans. The Eagles installed multiple defenses when Demeco was hurt from a week-to-week basis, where if Ryans was playing, they would run a more complicated defense because he could align everybody. And when he wasn't playing, they had to run a more simplistic defense. Now, I'm not saying all this to take away from Jonathan Gannon, because the Eagles have an impressive defense. They've improved a ton over last year. They set a record with the amount of sacks. Lord knows this organization can't get sacks since J.J. Watt walked out of the building. So, Gannon's a really nice coach, but I like Jake's point. If it's a tiebreaker, the tiebreaker goes to the franchise legend. The tiebreaker goes to the guy that J.J. Watt went to Twitter, and JJ Watt didn't talk about the Texans anymore. He didn't talk about Houston as much anymore. Like, for him to just kind of on a Friday night be like, hey, by the way, you should hire Demeco, I think that goes a long way. We know Andre Johnson's a big fan of the Demeco Ryans conversation. You talk and you hear from former Texans, they want Demeco Ryans to be in there. Like, he's a really good coach. This isn't one of those, like, and I know we used the example of Byron Leftwich in Jacksonville last year. Demeco's not fighting a Doug Peterson level candidate. He's fighting a guy that's almost his equal. So if there's a tiebreaker, let's go with the franchise legend.
J.J. Watt's tweet, for those who missed it over the weekend, quote, as a rookie in Houston, I bought my first house across the street from Demeco because if Miko thought it was the right place to live, it was the right place to live for me. Captain, leader, smart, tough, personable, crushed it as a DC. He will be a great head coach. It's worth noting J.J. tweeting that because this is a guy that only played with Demeco Ryans for 1 year. They only overlapped for one season when J.J. was a rookie. And that's the type of impact that Demeco Ryans had on the best player in the history of the Texans franchise. It's also worth noting because, as Cody said, J.J. Watt has kind of distanced himself from the Texans the last couple of years. I know part of that's because he's still playing, but it's a big deal for him to come out and endorse Demeco if he's getting buzz, I believe, that Demeco Ryans has a legit chance to be the Texans' next head coach.
Yeah, and it's not just J.J. Watt, right? I mean, you talked about Andre Johnson, but it's also his current players and former players in San Francisco. Like, those guys are raving about Demeco Ryans, and some of them are even making jokes about Demeco Ryans being a bad coach so they don't have to lose Demeco Ryans to somewhere else this offseason. Like, he's just done a tremendous, tremendous job. And once again, the enthusiasm and the passion that he brings to the table. He's the anti-Lovie Smith. And Lovie Smith gave you nothing in terms of excitement on the sideline and in press conferences. Demeco, you're not going to question whether or not he really wants to be here and whether or not he cares about what's going on. He's going to bring it 100%, 365 days of the year. And y'all are right. Look, hire the best coach. If you think Gannon is the right guy, I won't be too upset about it. I prefer Demeco, but Gannon is way more qualified than Lovie Smith was. Gannon is way more qualified than David Culley was. But if you're trying to decide between these two and you feel like they're pretty damn close to equal, I agree with y'all 100%. Lovie Smith. Demeco Ryans should absolutely be the hire that the Texans make to just get people excited about this team for the first time in way, way too long.
So we wait to see what Demeco's team does because that drastically affects the timeline of when you can get everything moving and get announced. If the 49ers win, it's a week from today that he can have his in-person interview. If the 49ers lose, you can interview him as much and as often as you want after that. Mm-hmm. And then you can find yourself with a head coach pretty quick after that if you decide so. Obviously, if the 49ers lose, that makes the Jonathan Gannon timeline a lot longer because then Gannon and the Eagles will be playing for the Super Bowl. So this Sunday's result drastically affects the timeline, potentially, the Houston Texans.
It will be very easy to figure out who the Texans coaches, though, regardless of what happens in the championship game on Sunday, because you would think over the next week, Sean Payton makes up his mind, and then all of a sudden, if it's not Demeco Ryans, you would think Demeco Ryans is a candidate in Denver. If the Texans can't get Demeco, then okay. Well, then Jonathan Gannon is probably their guy, and if he's still playing in the Super Bowl and they haven't named the head coach yet, you can connect the dots that Gannon would be the Texans head coach. So we'll get a lot of clarity over the next week for sure on the Texans coaching search.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button down below, and of course, subscribe to my channel. And if you're a Houston sports fan, listen to ESPN Houston 97.5 FM or 92.5 FM weekdays from 3 to 7 every afternoon.